The Empress who collected broken things. There was a rule in the Vrethkai Empire that every soldier learned before they learned how to fire a weapon. Never underestimate silence. Silence meant someone was thinking. And in the long, brutal history of the Vrethkai, of 8 civilization that had burned its way across 41 star systems, in 3 centuries, the only enemies that had ever truly hurt them were the ones who thought, quietly and struck without warning. Empress Zharuvek had forgotten that rule. She had not forgotten it through carelessness. She had forgotten it through victory. 41 systems. 63 species absorbed or annihilated. Wars that lasted decades reduced to months under her command. She was 800 years old, and in all that time, no enemy had ever made her feel what she was about to feel in the next 6 hours. The call came from her intelligence commander. She was reviewing fleet deployments over the Veth Nebula. A human transport vessel had been spotted drifting through the Durvak Passage, a long, narrow corridor of asteroid-choked space that the Vrethkai used as a shipping lane. The ship was venting plasma from a fractured drive coil. Its shields were cycling erratically. Its distress beacon was broadcasting on an open frequency like someone screaming into the dark with no idea who might answer. Empress Zharuvek had answered. Personally, she commanded the Iron Absolute, the flagship of the Vrethkai Fifth Armada, a vessel so large it generated its own gravitational field and had never once fled a battle. She had 3 escort destroyers with her, each one capable of glassing a continent. The human ship was a rust-colored hauler barely a tenth the size of her smallest destroyer. It was called the UAHV Relentless Tide, and according to her intelligence files, it was registered as a civilian supply vessel. Cargo manifest, medical equipment and communication hardware. She knew what humans were. The war was 3 years old now, and it had not gone the way the Vrethkai High Council had planned. Humanity had been given the standard offer: submission and integration, or eradication. The human ambassador had responded with something so spectacularly rude that the diplomatic record is now classified above the level of most generals. Then the humans had started winning. Not always. Not overwhelmingly. But enough. At the Vorthan Narrows, human fleet a quarter the size of the Vrethkai Armada had used magnetic pulse dispersal to blind the Vrethkai targeting systems, then picked apart the fleet from the flanks like wolves circling something 3 times their size. At the Durvak processing station, a Vrethkai garrison of 4,000 soldiers had been held at bay for 11 weeks. By a human force of 600 using nothing but tunnels, improvised explosives, and what survivors described as absolutely inexhaustible stubbornness. At the Keth corridor, a human engineer had somehow rerouted the power core of a captured Vrethkai cruiser and crashed it. Engines first, into the bridge section of the Vrethkai command vessel. The engineer survived. Records indicated she had been laughing when they pulled her from the wreckage. The High Council had started calling the humans the Broken Ones, a species that didn't know when it was shattered. Empress Zharuvek had her own term, one she did not share publicly, because it revealed something she was not prepared to admit. She called them dangerous, which was why. When the Relentless Tide appeared in the Durvak Passage like a wounded animal, she didn't send a subordinate. She came herself. Because a wounded human wasn't a problem to be delegated. It was a problem to be solved permanently while she watched. The boarding operation was clean. 3 minutes and 40 seconds from breach to control. Her soldiers swept the human vessel deck by deck, and at the end of it, they had 1 survivor. 1 human pulled from beneath a collapsed bulkhead in the cargo section, unconscious, breathing shallowly, bleeding from a cut across his forehead. His identification tag read, Davin Rook. Cargo logistics. Civilian contract. A nobody. A glorified delivery driver. Empress Zharuvek had him brought to her interrogation suite aboard the Iron Absolute, and she was waiting when he woke up. She was not a small creature. The Vrethkai were tall, 6-limbed,
packed with exoskeletons,
the color of deep-sea slate, and eyes that caught light like polished mirrors. Zharuvek was larger than most of her kind, the product of a genetic lineage that had been selectively engineered for command presence over dozens of generations. She wore no ceremonial armor here. She didn't need to. She was the armor. The human stirred in the restraint chair. His eyes opened pale gray, the color of storm clouds, and he looked around the room the way someone might look around when they've woken up somewhere unexpected, not terrified, just assessing. He looked at the restraints. He looked at the 2 Vrethkai guards by the door, each one twice his mass. He looked at the neural interface cables attached to his temples. He looked at the Empress herself. Then he looked at the ceiling for a moment, like he was collecting his thoughts. "Right," he said quietly. "Okay?" Empress Zharuvek leaned forward. She had done this hundreds of times. The first words a prisoner spoke told you everything about what kind of interrogation this was going to be. Fear produced bargaining. Defiance produced resistance. Shock produced useful confusion. Right? Okay? She had never heard those particular first words before. "Human," she said, her translator converting perfectly. "You are in the custody of the Vrethkai Empire. You will be given one opportunity to provide information voluntarily. Fleet positions, command frequencies, tactical protocols, the names and locations of your operational commanders. Cooperate, and your end will be dignified. Resist, and it will not." David Rook, cargo specialist, looked at her for a long moment. Then he tilted his head and said, "Can I ask you something first?" Zharuvek's 6 eyes narrowed. "No, it's a quick one," Rook said. "The ceiling in here, that dark paneling, is that load-bearing or decorative? Because the grain pattern suggests it's a secondary material, which is interesting for a flagship. Structural choice or aesthetic?" The room went very, very quiet. One of the guards looked at the other guard. The other guard had no idea what to do with that information and communicated this purely through posture. "Empress." Zharuvek felt something shift behind her eyes. Not anger, not yet. Something colder and stranger, curiosity. "Activate the neural interface," she said. The technician obeyed. The device was calibrated for Vrethkai pain thresholds, which were considerable and had been adjusted upward for alien physiologies. The human's jaw clenched. His hands gripped the armrests. A long, slow exhale pushed through his teeth. Then he looked at her again and said, with genuine, baffled calm, "You're going to want to hear what I have to say before you do more of that."
"Oh."
"Are you threatening me?" Zharuvek asked.
"Oh."
Rook said, "I'm giving you information. That's what you wanted, right? I'm trying to cooperate." He smiled. It was not the smile of a man in pain, and that bothered her more than any amount of defiance would have. "But you're going to want to be sitting down for the part where I explain why your ship is already in trouble." The weight of a grin impressed Zharuvek. Did not sit down. She had not achieved 8 centuries of dominance by letting cargo specialists set the terms of a conversation, but she did silently instruct the technician to pause the neural interface, not out of mercy, out of tactics. A prisoner who wanted to talk was a prisoner who could be mined. She had learned that from the Solvari species 300 years ago, before she'd had them dismantled. "Speak," she said. Maruk rolled his shoulders as much as the restraints allowed. "Okay, so, first question, do you know why a civilian cargo ship was carrying Tier 4 quantum relay hardware?" Zharuvek's intelligence commander, Velrix, was standing in the corner of the room, a slender Vrethkai, with silver-threaded exoskeletal plates and the permanently pinched expression of someone who had spent decades sifting through enemy secrets. She glanced at her Empress with an expression that meant, "This is the right question, and I don't like that he's the one asking it. Your manifest listed medical equipment and communication hardware?" Zharuvek said, "Right. Communication hardware." Rook raised an eyebrow. "Quantum relay hardware is communication hardware. Technically, the way a plasma cannon is technically metalwork." He leaned back as far as he could in the chair. Tier 4 relays are the kind that can't be jammed, can't be intercepted, and can transmit through the interference field that the Durvak asteroid belt generates naturally. They're also, he added conversationally, The kind that can be set to broadcast a carrier signal indefinitely, even if the ship transmitting them has no power. Even if the ship transmitting them has been boarded and its crew incapacitated. The silence in the room had a different quality now. "You're saying," Velrix said carefully, "that the relay is still transmitting." "It's been since you grabbed me," Rook confirmed. "Positional data, mostly. The iron absolute doesn't exactly move quietly. Gravitational displacement at this mass is pretty hard to mask. Anyone with the right receiver and the right encryption key has known exactly where you are since you breached my ship." He paused. "That's been about 40 minutes now." Zharuvek studied him. "This is a fabrication. You are trying to create panic." "Maybe," Rook said agreeably. "Or maybe Earth's command spent for months figuring out that you like to take prisoners personally, and that when you do, you like to take your time with the interrogation. And that the iron absolute sits stationary during those interrogations because you don't like movement during what you consider delicate work." He looked at her steadily. "You're predictable, Empress. Not stupid, not weak, just predictable. And humans are very, very good at exploiting predictable." Empress Zharuvek was 800 years old. She had survived assassination attempts, coup attempts, and 6 major wars. She did not rattle easily. But there was a quality to this human's voice, a calm, matter-of-fact clarity that made something ancient in her tactical mind start paying very close attention.
All right,
She said, already scanning. Her intelligence commander was bent over a display panel, her 6 fingers moving rapidly. A pause. Another pause. Then she straightened up, very slowly, and said nothing. That silence was its own answer. "Long-range sensors are picking up. Mass displacement," Velrix said, choosing her words with surgical care. "Multiple sources. At the edge of the Durvak field, they are moving through the asteroid belt." "Through." One of the guard commanders repeated, "That's not possible. The density in there would shred any ship moving at combat speed." "Yes," Rook said. He was smiling now, not triumphantly. Almost apologetically, the way someone smiles when they're explaining something obvious. "But not if you're moving slow. Not if you know exactly where every rock is because you mapped the passage.
else.
6 weeks ago with stealth drones that you disguised as debris. Not if you've got pilots who grew up playing spatial navigation games and think threading an asteroid field at low speed is basically a puzzle, not a threat." He tilted his head. "We're good at puzzles." The tactical display updated. Zharuvek looked at it. She had excellent discipline. But she was aware of the way her 6 limbs had very slightly stiffened. 14 human vessels. None of them larger than a light cruiser. All of them moving in loose, almost wandering formations through the belt, peering on sensors one by one, like they were strolling into a room rather than executing a military operation. They were not moving in any pattern her tactical systems could parse or predict. "Battle stations," she said. Her voice was flat and absolute. "All hands. Weapons hot. Intercept formations Delta and Keth." Alarms began to sound throughout the iron absolute. "See, here's the thing about that," Rook said. The alarms didn't seem to bother him at all. "Delta and Keth formations are in your tactical library. We have your tactical library. We got it 18 months ago when Lieutenant Parsa, she's a signals specialist, brilliant woman, terrible taste in music, cracked your encryption during the Vorthan engagement. So your formation protocols are," he gestured vaguely with his restrained hand, "known quantities." Velrix turned from the display, and her mirrored eyes reflected the alarm lights in small, frantic pulses. "Your Majesty? They are not forming an assault line." "Then what are they doing?" Zharuvek asked. Velrix watched the display for another 3 seconds. "I don't know," she said. And those 3 words, from Velrix, who had never in 40 years of service said, "I don't know about an enemy formation," landed in the room like a dropped weapon. The human ships were spreading, splitting into fragments of 2 and 3, moving in directions that served no tactical purpose that any Vrethkai doctrine recognized. One pair was heading directly toward the largest concentration of asteroids rather than away from it. 2 others were moving in a long, slow arc that would take them behind the Iron Absolute's engine section, but at a range so extreme that they couldn't possibly threaten it. One ship was barely moving at all, drifting like it had lost power. "They're not attacking," a junior tactical officer said, confused. "No," Empress Zharuvek said slowly. "They're not." She looked at Rook. "What are they doing?" David Rook's smile was patient and a little sad. "They're making you choose," he said. "Every ship you target is a ship you're not targeting. Every formation you commit to is a formation that doesn't cover a different angle. They will keep splitting, keep moving in ways that don't make sense to you, until your targeting systems are so fractured, just trying to track all of them, that you can't build a clean firing solution on any of them." He paused. "And while you're doing that, an explosion rocked the Iron Absolute. Not a hit from a weapon. Something internal. Something in the secondary hull on Deck 17, then another. Deck 9. "Infiltrators aboard," came the report from the security deck. "Multiple breaches. Teams are static." Rook looked at her with those storm-gray eyes and said nothing more. He didn't need to. Empress Zharuvek, of the Vrethkai Empire, sovereign of 41 systems, looked at the tactical display showing her fleet being unmade by ships that moved like they were improvising, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific cold clarity of someone who has just realized they are several steps behind. "How many of your crew members are actually soldiers?" she asked. "All of us," Rook said simply. "The cargo specialist thing is a cover. Has been for 5 months." He let that sit for a moment. "We've been waiting for you to take the bait for about 11 weeks. You're very thorough about avoiding personal engagement, you know? That's usually a strength. Took us a while to figure out what kind of situation would make you show up yourself. And what situation was that?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "A helpless one," Rook said. "You collect broken things, Empress? It's documented. 17 separate instances of you personally overseeing the capture. An interrogation of enemy personnel when you believed them to be isolated and defenseless." Looked at her without hostility. "Just fact. We gave you a defenseless ship. A nobody survivor. A perfect, easy victory. And you came." He let the silence stretch. "We knew you would." No. The Iron Absolute shuddered again. This time, the lights flickered. The throne that couldn't hold, the throne hall of the Iron Absolute, was not designed for comfort. No throne hall in the Vrethkai Empire was. Comfort was a philosophy the Vrethkai had dismantled centuries ago, along with most species that had embraced it. The hall was 60 meters long, its walls inlaid with the compressed alloy signatures of every flagship. Zharuvek had destroyed in personal engagement 19 vessels. 2,400 crew reduced to wall decoration. The floor was black glass Vrethstone, quarried from the homeworld's deepest deposits, polished until it reflected everything perfectly. Every visitor who entered this room saw themselves inverted beneath their own feet, a subtle, practiced reminder that they stood at Zharuvek's discretion. They had moved Rook here from the interrogation suite. It was a standard escalation when the pain tools failed to create useful fear. The architecture was supposed to finish the job. He walked in looking at the walls the way a person looks at a museum. "These are ships," he said to no one in particular. "The alloy signatures. You melted down their hulls and put them in the walls." "A reminder," said High Warlord Skeven, Zharuvek's ground forces commander, a massive Vrethkai, who had personally led 3 planetary invasions, "of what happens to those who oppose us." H.M. Rook turned a full circle, taking it all in. "We do something similar. We put the names on walls. Big stone walls, back on Earth. Every soldier who died, tens of thousands of names." He stopped turning. "We don't put the enemy in there. It's just ours. Because we're not trying to remind ourselves that we're dangerous. We're trying to remind ourselves what it costs." He looked at Skeven. "That's a different kind of wall." Empress Zharuvek descended 3 steps from her command dais and stopped in front of him. Around the hall, 40 armed Vrethkai soldiers held position. The battle outside was ongoing, but the Iron Absolute's primary weapons were still functional. And the Empress was not the kind of commander who abandoned a task. "You are not a cargo specialist," she said. "No, what are you? Officially? Liaison Officer, 3rd Strategic Deception Division. He looked at her directly. Unofficially, I'm the guy who spent 8 months building a profile of you, Empress. Your decisions. Your patterns. Your habits. The things you do when you think you're winning? He paused. You are brilliant at war. You genuinely are. But you've won so many times that winning has become a reflex. And reflexes, he said, are exploitable. Zharuvek was silent for a moment. The infiltration teams aboard this vessel. 12 operatives. They've been here for 4 hours. They boarded during the initial scan phase, when your sensor crews were focused on the relentless tide. Rook showed no particular pride in this. Just information. They are currently positioned at your engineering core, your secondary weapons array, and your communication relay hub. They have enough shaped charges to take all 3 offline simultaneously. He looked at her steadily. Not to destroy the ship, to strand it. Skeven stepped forward. Your people will never leave this vessel alive. It's probably not all of them, Rook said. And his voice changed texture when he said it, still even, still controlled. But with something underneath it that wasn't performance. Something real. That's not the mission parameter. The mission parameter is to cripple the Iron Absolute and create enough pressure on Vrethkai's strategic resources that your High Council has no choice but to open diplomatic communication. He paused. We don't need to destroy you, Empress. We need to cost you enough that destroying us stops making economic sense. Zharuvek looked at him for a long time. She was running calculations that she hadn't needed to run in decades. You said the infiltrators have charges on my engineering core? Yes. If those detonate, this ship doesn't return to port under its own power. No, but your crew survives. My people included, if your soldiers stand down and let them reach the evacuation bay. He held her gaze. We're not here to kill your crew. We're not here to kill you. We're here to make you understand something, and what is that? Rook was quiet for a moment. Outside the hall's viewports, the battle was still visible, small. Fast human ships moving in those incomprehensible patterns. Vrethkai weapons fire lancing out and finding nothing. The asteroid field behind them, periodically illuminated by small, precise detonations. 3 years ago, he said, your representatives came to Earth. They told us we had 2 choices. Join the Vrethkai Empire or be erased. Our ambassador, a man named Torres, who is retired now, and I understand, grows vegetables, told them that humanity had a 3rd option they hadn't considered. Rook looked at her. We've been demonstrating that 3rd option for 3 years. We're not going to stop. We're not built to stop. We don't have a genetic off-switch for resistance. We don't have a cultural breaking point. You can kill 1,000 of us, and 10,000 will learn from those 1,000 and come at you differently. You can destroy a fleet, and the crews who survive will spend the next. You're figuring out exactly why that fleet failed and engineering a situation where it can't happen again. He paused. You've been trying to win a war. We've been trying to make that war too expensive to continue. That's not the same thing. You're describing attrition, Skeven said. I'm describing evolution, Rook replied. Every loss we take makes us better. Every loss you take makes you angry. Angry is worse than better. The hall's tactical feed updated. The battle outside was shifting. The human ships, still in those fractured, wandering patterns had somehow, over the course of the engagement, maneuvered 3 of their number into a triangulation that bracketed the Iron Absolute's primary weapons array. None of them had been in that position 10 minutes ago. The movement had been so gradual, so organic, so apparently aimless, that the Vrethkai targeting commanders hadn't flagged it as a formation at all. It wasn't a formation. It was an improvisation. 14 pilots following a loose objective, get into position by whatever route made sense in the moment. Communicating constantly, adjusting constantly, arriving at a tactical result through a process that looked like chaos and functioned like precision. Belrix came through the hall's side entrance, moving quickly and bent to speak quietly into the Empress's auditory receptor. Her expression, already measured, became very still. Zharuvek looked at the feed, then at Rook. 14 more human vessels have just emerged from the far end of the Durvak Passage, she said. Double quotes, yes, Rook said. That brings their total force to 28 ships, against a flagship and 3 destroyers, plus the infiltrators already aboard your ship. We outgunned them significantly. You outgunned them completely, Rook agreed. Raw firepower? You win every time. That's not the game we're playing. He looked at her with those pale, even eyes. The game we're playing is, how long can the Vrethkai Empire sustain a war in which every engagement costs more than it produces? How many flagships can you lose before the High Council starts doing the math? How many garrison worlds can you commit to suppressing a species that won't suppress before your other? Borders start looking soft to your other neighbors. He tilted his head. You have enemies who are not human, Empress. We know who they are. We've been watching your eastern frontier get thin for 18 months while your resources flow toward us. Zharuvek was very still. You've been sharing intelligence, she said. About our other borders? With your neighbors? No. We're not trying to start a different war. We're trying to end this one. Rook exhaled. But we noticed, and we're mentioning it, because we need you to understand that we see the whole board, not just our corner of it. He paused. We're not fighting because we think we can conquer you. We're fighting because you tried to erase us, and we can't let that stand. There's a difference between those two things. Empress Zharuvek descended the last 3 steps. She stood before him now at her full height, 6 limbs, ancient eyes, 8 centuries of authority. And Davin Rook, liaison officer, and very patient human being, looked up at her without flinching. You came here knowing you might not leave, she said. Yes, and you're not afraid. He considered that honestly. I'm afraid, he said. I'd be an idiot not to be. But being afraid isn't the same as being stopped by fear. That's something we learned a long time ago, fighting each other, before we ever met you. He paused. Fear is information. It tells you the situation is serious. It doesn't tell you to quit. Zharuvek looked at him for a long time. The battle feed continued to update. Her weapons commanders were asking for orders. Her security teams were reporting that the infiltrators were in position and uncontactable. Her engineering officers were reporting anomalous readings from the PTO core. Everything was pointing in one direction. She thought about 41 systems. She thought about 63 species. She thought about the long, clean history of Vrethkai expansion. In the 3 years since it had hit something that wouldn't move. She thought about walls with alloy signatures and walls with names. She thought about what each of them said about the people who built them. Stand down, she said. Her voice carried through the hall. All forces. Stand down. Weapons safe. Open communication on neutral frequency 7. A pause. And someone tell my engineering officers to brace. The human teams below deck are going to be coming up shortly, and I want them met without weapons. The hall went silent. High Warlord Skeven stared at her. Your Majesty, there are 53 other species in the Eastern Coalition who have been watching this war, Zharuvek said quietly. Still looking at Rook, if I spend the next decade pouring resources into a conflict that cannot be won by conventional force, I will have the most expensive border in the Empire in the wrong direction. She exhaled slowly. I am not capitulating. I am reassessing. Rook nodded. That's all we asked. Don't be smug about it. I'm genuinely not, he said, and he meant it. We didn't want this war either. We wanted to exist. You made those the same thing. Zharuvek turned to Velrix. Open the channel. Use my personal cipher. A pause. We are going to have a conversation with the human government. A real one. And then we are going to have a conversation with my High Council about what the word expansion means when it has limits. She turned back to Rook one more time. You are a cargo specialist, she said. It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement. You hauled something across the Durvak Passage and delivered it. Rook looked at her. What did I deliver? A perspective, she said, and the word cost her something. I hadn't considered before. From somewhere deep in the Iron Absolute, a series of small, precise charges detonated in perfect sequence, not in the engineering core, not in the weapons array, but in a single corridor in the secondary hull that vented a section of the ship's oxygen supply. Not a wound. A punctuation mark. A demonstration of what had been possible and had chosen, deliberately, not to happen. The human infiltrators came up through the service corridors 90 seconds later. Hands visible, equipment secured, and they were not shot at. Davin Rook looked at the ceiling of the hall that paneled, non-load-bearing ceiling, and let out a breath that had been waiting for a long time. Outside, the human fleet was holding position. Not retreating, not advancing, waiting the way something patient waits, because patience was not passivity. It was choice. It was a species that had learned over thousands of years of fighting itself and its own worst instincts, that the moment after a battle was sometimes the most important one, the moment. Where you decided what the battle had been for, Empress Zharuvek sat back on her throne. She looked at her walls at 19 flagships pressed into alloy decoration, and for the first time in 8 centuries, she thought about what was missing from them. Not enemies, not trophies, not proof of victory. What was missing was the cost. She hadn't built a wall with names. She'd built a wall with victories. And the difference between those two things, she was beginning to understand, was the difference between a civilization that learned from war and one that only harvested it. The communication channel opened. A human voice came through, calm, measured, carrying the careful gravity of someone who had been waiting 3 years for this exact moment and intended to use it well. Empress Zharuvek, the voice said. This is Director Arlen of the United Authority Strategic Command. We'd like to talk. The Empress looked at Rook one more time. He gave her nothing, no smirk, no triumph, no I told you so. Just those gray eyes, patient as weather, steady as old stone. Director Arlen Zharuvek said, I am listening. And in that moment, in the space between a weapon being lowered and a word being spoken, something shifted in the fabric of two civilizations. Not peace. Not yet. Not forgiveness. Not trust. Not the easy resolution that neither side had earned. But something that had not existed 3 years ago. And had cost everything to build, the willingness to hear. Somewhere in the eastern frontier, the Vrethkai border held. Somewhere in human space, 28 ships cut their engines and drifted, and their crews sat in their chairs and breathed, and no one died. The universe is very large, and it does not care about the things that happen inside it. But sometimes, in the long dark between stars, two species look at each other across all the distance that violence creates, and one of them says, enough, and the other one says, we were ready for this. They had always been ready for this. Humanity had been ready for this since the first time it looked at something larger and more powerful and more certain of its own victory, and decided that certainty was the thing most worth dismantling. You cannot conquer people who are not afraid of cost. You cannot break people who use their breaking as a blueprint. You cannot erase a species that has spent its entire history looking at the dark and deciding, stubbornly, unreasonably, with full knowledge of the odds, to carry a light anyway. The Vrethkai Empire had called them broken. The broken ones had fixed the war, and no one who heard that story across 41 systems, in every language the galaxy had yet invented, would ever again mistake a damaged ship drifting through an asteroid field for anything less than exactly what it was, a message. Written in patience and carried by people who had decided a long time ago. That survival was not the ceiling, it was the floor. What the victors carried home 3 systems away? Aboard the UAHV Tenacity, the debrief took place in a room that smelled like recycled air and cold coffee. It was a small room. Deliberately small. The kind of space that made generals feel like people. And people feel like they were part of something that fit inside human scale. A table, 8 chairs. A tactical display that someone had turned to face the wall because the battle was over. No one wanted to stare at maps anymore. Rook sat at one end of the table. The infiltration team was around him, 6 operatives, 2 signals, specialists, and Major Drell, whose job had technically been to blow up the engineering core of a Vrethkai flagship, and who had instead spent 45 minutes sitting in a maintenance shaft playing a card game on her datapad while she waited to see if she'd need to. She'd won 17 hands. The flagship was intact, Across from Rook sat the people who had made the operation possible long before it started, Captain Yeva Soren, who commanded the tenacity and had spent 6 months supervising the mapping of the Durvak Passage without anyone outside this room knowing why. Commander Fetch, Signals Intelligence, who had built the quantum relay system that turned the relentless tide into a broadcasting antenna. Lieutenant Parsa, the encryption specialist Rook, had mentioned to the Empress, who looked deeply uncomfortable being mentioned in that context. "She knows my name now," Parsa said. "I want that on record. A Vrethkai Empress knows my name. She knows you cracked her encryption," Rook said. "She probably considers that a compliment. I do not find that reassuring." Director Arlen sat at the head of the table via secure link, her image rendered in the quiet blue of deep space transmission. She was a compact woman with dark eyes and the particular economy of expression that came from spending 30 years in strategic command where being readable was a liability. She looked at Rook the way she looked at most successful operations, with the focused neutrality of someone already thinking about the next problem. "Empress has agreed to a preliminary ceasefire framework," she said. 48 hours, renewable. Her representatives have asked for a 2-week window to consult the High Council before moving to formal negotiation.
Oh.
She paused. "We've agreed." "It's 2 weeks," Major Drell said. "That's a long time to hold a ceasefire." "It's a long time to change 800 years of policy," Soren replied. "Let her have 2 weeks. What do we think the Council does?" Rook asked. Arlen was quiet for a moment. "Intelligence assessment is divided. The hardliners will push for continuation. They'll argue we got lucky, that the Durvak operation was a trick that only worked once." She paused. "They're not entirely wrong. They're entirely wrong," Fetch said. "It's not about the trick. It's about the underlying logic. The Iron Absolute operation worked because Zharuvek has a documented behavioral pattern. Other Vrethkai commanders have other patterns. We have files on 47 of them." He looked at Arlen. "We can do versions of this indefinitely? Different approaches, same principle. We exploit predictability. They don't even know they're predictable because no species they've ever fought has had the patience to document their habits first. That's the thing they don't understand about us." Soren said quietly, "We've been studying war for thousands of years. Studying it, writing it down, arguing about it, revising our conclusions. We have military history going back to before we had metal. They have 300 years of unbroken conquest. 300 years of winning." She shook her head. "They never had to learn from losing. We had to. Every century." Rook looked at the far wall where the tactical display faced away from them. He thought about the throne hall. The alloy walls? The inverted reflections in the floor. "She's smart," he said. "Zharuvek. I want to be clear about that. She's not stupid, and she's not brittle. When she understood the situation, she adapted." He paused. "Most commanders I've read about in Vrethkai history, they'd have gone down fighting before they stood down. She stood down because she ran the numbers, and the numbers said this was wrong." He looked at Arlen. "That's who we're negotiating with. Someone who can change her mind when the evidence demands it."
Oh, amazing.
"That's either reassuring or terrifying," Parsa said. "Both," Rook said. "Like most useful things?" Arlen looked at him for a moment. "You were in that chair for nearly 3 hours? Neural interface active for portions of it?" "Yes." "Report said you maintained cover throughout. No operational security breach?" "Yes." "The report also said you gave her a significant amount of tactical context. Voluntarily." Rook met her eyes. "We needed her to understand that we see the whole board. If she thought we were improvising on luck, she'd wait us out. We had to show her we were thinking further ahead than this engagement." He paused. "Everything I told her was either already known from the intercepts or was deliberately surfaced. Nothing actionable." Arlen looked at him for another moment. "The Eastern Frontier Intelligence? We've known about the strain on their border for 18 months. Sharing that we knew cost us nothing. Showing her we knew changed the calculus." He kept his voice even. "She needed to understand that fighting us isn't a war she's winning in one direction. It's a drain in every direction. A silence settled over the room. Outside, the tenacity was moving slow, deliberate transit through clear space, leaving the Durvak Passage behind. Through the porthole at the end of the room, stars moved at the long, measured pace of a ship that was not fleeing anything. 11 of the 28 ships in the Durvak fleet took fire, Commander Fetch said, looking at his datapad. 3 were significantly damaged. The Ardent Rising lost 14 crew members. He set the pad down. 14. The room held that number for a moment. Were they briefed? Major Drell asked. All crews were fully briefed, Arlen said. Voluntary operation throughout. No one was ordered into the belt. They knew, Rook said quietly. They knew, Arlen confirmed. Then they chose, Soren said. It wasn't a comfort. It was just true, and true was what this room dealt in. Same as everyone in this room chose. Parsa, who had been quiet, said, 14. She said it the way you say a word you're trying to understand the full weight of. We got a ceasefire framework and preliminary negotiations and an empress who's reconsidering 3 centuries of expansion policy. She looked at the table. And 14 people who won't know how it ends. No one argued with that. No one tried to make it balance. This was the other thing about humanity that the Vrethkai didn't understand yet. The thing that would take longer to explain than any tactical briefing. Longer than any intelligence file. Longer than even the most patient debrief. The capacity to hold both things at once. The victory and the cost. To refuse to let one erase the other. To build walls with names on them and stand in front of those walls and say, we see you. We carry you. We do not pretend this was free. Strength and grief. Hope and loss. Not despite each other. Because of each other, that was the thing that made humanity hard to kill. Not the tactics. Not the engineers. Not the improvisation or the laughter or the patience. All of those things came from somewhere deeper. They came from a species that had spent thousands of years learning to carry its dead without being buried by them. And to keep moving forward, not because the forward was guaranteed to be good, but because stopping was the only thing that was guaranteed to be worse. All right, Arlen said finally. We debrief fully tomorrow morning. For tonight, she looked around the small room. At the coffee, at the table, at the people who had been carrying this for 6 months. Tonight you rest. A pause. That's an order. Rook nodded. He stood and his knees gave a small, honest protest about the chair they'd been in for the last 3 hours, and he ignored that protest and got up.
There is a moment in every war when one side realizes the fight was never about weapons. It was about will. Divine Rook did not defeat the Vrithkai Empire with firepower. He defeated it with something far older, far harder to kill. The refusal to be afraid of cost. Humanity has always known that the most dangerous thing in any room is not the largest creature. It is the one that has already decided what it is willing to lose. That is the lesson Empress Zharuvek carried out of that throne room. Not defeat, understanding. And sometimes understanding is the harder victory to earn. If this story moved you, if something in it felt true, take 1 second and leave a like. It is a small thing, but it tells the algorithm that stories like this deserve to be heard. Subscribe if you want to stay. There are more of these, more worlds, more species, more moments where humanity surprises the galaxy by simply refusing to stop. And leave a comment. Tell me, if you were in that interrogation chair, what would your first words have been? The stars are waiting. So am I.